Communicating is hard. Let's play a little game. Raise a finger if you've ever felt like you've had the same conversation over and over again with someone and still no results. Raise a finger if you've ever offended someone unintentionally. Raise a finger if you've ever gotten offended by someone. Raise a finger if you've ever had a conversation turn into a heated argument. And finally, raise a finger if you simply avoided a conversation entirely because you don't know how to bring it up or you're just too scared of the consequences. 5 out of 5. I got 5 out of 5. Let me know in the comments what you got. Yeah, conversations are hard. And it's honestly not your fault. Growing up, you were probably never explicitly taught how to communicate. You sort of were just expected to observe adults, your parents, and other people who themselves were probably also not taught how to communicate either. Yet you're somehow just supposed to have figured it all out magically. Well, one of my New Year's resolutions for 2025 is to learn all of these basic skills that I supposedly should know by now, but still don't. And I'm starting off with this book called Crucial Conversations to Learn How to Communicate. But it is not enough just to listen to me talk. So at the end of this video, I've also included a little assessment. If you're able to answer all of the questions in that assessment, then you will have learned how to communicate. At least how to communicate much better. Now, without further ado, let's get started. A portion of this video is sponsored by HubSpot. So first things first, we need to define the term crucial conversation. A crucial conversation is a discussion between 2 or more people that contains 3 components. Number 1, opinions vary. Number 2, stakes are high. And number 3, emotions run strong. Say you and your colleague are working on an important presentation that you need to present tomorrow morning. You've already had quite a lot of back and forth trying to figure out what's supposed to be in the presentation, how it is that you should be portraying things, and you're both getting pretty tired. It's already like 7 p.m. Your colleague says, we should spend the rest of our time trying to make the presentation look amazing. It needs to visually wow the client. And you say, okay, I get that, but I think we should actually focus on validating the data itself since it's coming from a variety of different sources. If the data is not accurate, the rest of it doesn't matter anyway, which is all going to be fluff. The 2 of you go back and forth about this for a little bit longer, and he's getting irritated and you're getting irritated because he's getting irritated, and of course you're both very, very tired. And finally, he exclaims, "You're not even listening to me." Oh shit! This conversation has just turned into a crucial conversation. All 3 components are now satisfied. Your opinions vary in terms of what you should be spending your time on. The stakes are high because it's an important project. It's late, you're both tired, and you're on a tight deadline. This is a common example of a crucial conversation, and you have many of these types of conversations throughout your life. Some other examples include ending a relationship, talking to a coworker that makes offensive comments, asking a friend to repay a loan, giving the boss feedback about her behavior, approaching a boss who's breaking their own rules, addressing racist or sexist behaviors, etc., etc., etc. None of these sound very fun, do they? So that's why the first question that we need to answer is, why do we even need to have a crucial conversation? Why can't you just not have it? Pretend it's not there? Well, the book explains. Unfortunately, many people actually do that, but they don't get away with it. You see, at the heart of a crucial conversation is a problem, and problems, unless they're solved, they don't magically go away. They tend to fester and eventually show up in nasty ways, like snide comments, eye rolls, sarcasm, and just a general sense of growing resentment towards that person. And that's why you actually have to deal with it. And even worse, the biggest single factor in terms of your ability of resolving one of these problems is lag time. The greater the lag time, which is when there is a problem and you actually addressing the problem, the harder it becomes to solve. It's like having a poison that slowly spreads as time goes on. The longer it spreads, the harder it is to get rid of it. But it's also not enough just to address the problem. If you handle it poorly, it can also lead to bad results, like losing a friend or just feeling like you're spending a lot of time and energy on something and it's just nothing is getting solved and it's going to waste. And that is why when there is a problem, you need to have that crucial conversation, and you need to have it quickly, and you need to have it well. The good news is that if you manage to do that, not only are you able to resolve the problem, you'll find that your relationship with that person becomes stronger as well. And this is something that I really noticed myself. After having crucial conversations with people I've been avoiding for a very long time, I actually have a stronger bond with them than I've ever had before. All right, now let's talk about how to have a crucial conversation. It starts from before you even open your mouth. It starts with choosing the right topic to even talk about. Have you ever walked away from a conversation feeling like the issue is not entirely resolved, and then you find yourself having the same conversation over and over again, and is just like still there. Well, that is the telltale sign that you're having the wrong conversation. You see, just because you decide to actually talk and have that conversation doesn't necessarily mean that you're talking about the right thing. What? Let me explain. Let's take Wendy and Sandrine, for example. Wendy is a project manager with lots of experience leading successful projects that are both small and large. Sandrine is her manager who was recently hired and has a reputation as a hard-charging, get-things-done kind of executive. So Sandrine says, "All right, Wendy, let's talk timelines." Wendy says, "It'll take us over 6 months." And Sandrine says, "Oh, well, when I looked, you should be able to finish this in a quarter." Wendy then says, "Well, it's a good thing that we're talking about it now before we've made any commitments because there is no way we can finish it on that timeline." Sandrine responds, "That's why I put you in this role in the first place. You are able to do the impossible. I need you to figure out how to get this done by the end of the quarter because other projects are at stake. The accelerated schedules are already in the master plans." Wendy goes like, "What? You agreed to a deadline without even talking to me about it?" And Sandrine pushes forward. "Hey, Wendy, you know we really need this big win. Look, I really pushed for you to be the one to lead this project. Do you know what I have said about you? I said you were a team player. Was I mistaken?" Oh shit. Yeah. By this point, Wendy's brain and emotions are all over the place. She's thinking about how in the world is she going to get this done? How many late nights is she going to have? How is she going to tell her husband and her kids that she's just not going to be coming home for the next quarter? She's even thinking that this is so unfair and like, does she even want to work for Sandrine anymore? Does she even need this job? Wendy is now facing a crucial conversation and she needs to proceed carefully because at this point, she can easily fall into the trap of having the wrong conversation by naturally defaulting to two common mistakes. The first one is called easy over hard. Wendy is fuming, but it's still really hard to bring up the actual problem, which is the fact that Sandrine went behind her back to tell the boss about a deadline that they never talked about before. So instead, she chooses to have a easier conversation. She might just start nitpicking the timelines, saying that, oh, she doesn't like this part of it, or she doesn't like that part of it, or just going through the specs and just being like, oh, can't do that, can't do this. The second common mistake is called recent over right. This is when if there's reoccurring issues, you only address the most recent issue as opposed to the other issues previously. In this specific case, unfortunately, this is not the first time that Sandrine has done this. Sandrine has actually went behind Wendy's back multiple times to make commitments that she had not discussed prior. But she may be thinking, oh, like, this is the most important thing right now. So she only chooses to address this current problem as opposed to addressing the reoccurring issue. You see, it's quite easy to fall into the trap of having a wrong conversation because for every issue, there's actually 3 levels of conversations that can be had. The book gives a wonderful acronym here to remember them by called CPR. C stands for content, which is when a problem first occurs and you're addressing the specific content of the problem. P stands for pattern. This is when a similar issue has come up more than once, maybe 2 times, 3 times, or even more. And 3 is relationship. You see, as time goes on and this reoccurring issue keeps coming up, it will eventually start also deteriorating the relationship that you have with that person. And you start having deeper issues of lack of trust, confidence, or respect. Content conversations are the easiest ones to have because they're very tangible and it's very clearly there and you don't need to have the risk of potentially offending the other person. But many issues are not actually one-time issues. They reoccur and they become a pattern and eventually also start deteriorating in a relationship. When that happens, just having a content conversation doesn't actually resolve the problem and you're left with a feeling of frustration because the pattern that's there, deteriorating relationship, is still happening. Even if you resolve that specific instance, it's just going to happen again. In the case of Wendy and Sandrine, this problem has been going on for a while now, and it absolutely has reached a relationship level. Wendy is starting to think that Sandrine just doesn't even respect her anymore. So in this situation, Wendy has to start the relationship level conversation. This is what she can say. I get we're in a tough spot here and I don't want to disappoint your leadership any more than you do. And I want you to know that I'm committed to getting stuff done. At the same time, I want us to set realistic goals. Otherwise, we're setting ourselves up to fail. And maybe even more important, I want us to work together in a way where we're upfront with each other about our needs and concerns. This is the start of the right conversation, the relationship conversation. Another word of warning here is that maybe you finally figured out what is the right conversation to have and you start having that conversation. It's very common for the other person to want to derail you and start having another type of conversation, whether intentionally or unintentionally. And you have to be very cognizant of this to bring back the conversation. It's because the conversations on the pattern and the relationship level is hard, and the other person may feel uncomfortable and try to change the subject. Let's look at a conversation between Tyra and Katie, for example. Tyra and Katie are co-workers, and Tyra says to Katie, I was expecting to get the raw data files yesterday, but I still haven't seen it yet. Are they ready? And Katie says, oh my god, I am so sorry. It's just so hard to concentrate because that creepy guy, Mark, just keeps staring at me up and down, and every time I try to leave that cubicle, he just tries to corner me. I'm just so on edge and it completely slipped my mind. Damn. That was a lot, and Tyra's probably thinking, that is not what I signed up for. I just want my data files. But this is also a case of potential sexual harassment. It is a very important problem. So at this point, Tyra has two options. The first one is that she chooses to address the guy problem first and says something like, wow, I can tell you're upset. Let's talk about this. We'll come back to the data file later. Or if she feels like it's more important to continue that conversation about the data files, she could say, wow, that's a really big deal and I really want to talk to you about this because it's really important. At the same time, I have 30 minutes to get this data file to the ops team. Let's figure out this data file issue first and then get back to Mark because it does need to be addressed. This is called bookmarking and allows you to have control over that conversation. If you choose to talk about a different topic first, by verbally acknowledging the change in conversation, you can later come back and have the proper conversation. Or if you choose to stick with the original conversation, you're verbally telling the other person that you're still acknowledging the importance of their other conversation, but you just simply want to focus on the one here first. Okay, now that we figured out what it is that you should be talking about, now let's talk about how to talk about it. People who are skilled in conversation begin with the right motives and also make sure that they stick to the right motives throughout the conversation. This sounds really easy, but when emotions are flying, voices start getting raised, potential accusations start flying, it can get really hard. Let's take a look at Greta, the CEO of a mid-sized corporation. It's 2 hours into a pretty tense meeting she's having with leadership. For the past 6 months, she's been really campaigning hard to cut down costs. Yet, there hasn't really been any result, and Greta wants to know why. When posed with this question, a manager kind of like very cautiously, shakingly stands up and nervously asks if he can ask a very tough question. Greta goes like, yes, of course. And he says, Greta, you've been asking us for 6 months to find ways to cut costs. I'd be lying if we said that we've given you much more than a lukewarm response. Well, it's because while you've been asking us to use both sides of our paper and forego travel, you have been having a second office built. Oh shit. Greta freezes and turns bright red, and the manager continues, the rumor is that the furniture alone will cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. Is that right? This conversation has just turned crucial. And Greta has two choices. Her gut instinct is to raise her voice, point her finger at the manager, and go, how dare you? But she reminds herself of her motive for this conversation. Her motive is that she wants to cut costs while maintaining a good relationship with her leadership. So she takes a deep breath and instead says, I'm glad that you asked the question, and thank you for taking that risk. I appreciate the trust it shows in me. This is what it means to begin with the right motives and keep focusing on the right motives no matter what else is happening. Something I like to do to practice my communication skills, both like one-on-one conversations as well as presentations to a group of people, is by practicing with AI. I especially like using the voice functionality from ChatGPT. Could you act as the recruiter, the interviewer, and ask me some behavioral questions?
Tell me about a time when you had to...
So if you're interested in practicing your communication skills with AI, or if you just want to, be more productive using AI in general, I highly recommend that you check out this resource that I made with HubSpot. It is a prompt engineering quick start guide. It includes a step-by-step framework for how it is to craft better prompts and additional tips for getting better results. I'm a little bit biased because, I made part of it, but I actually do really like the fact that there is this flow of bad prompt, good prompt, and excellent prompt. So it really shows how it is that you can take a prompt and elevate it. I think if you can start thinking in this way, with a little bit of practice, you're going to be so much better at prompt engineering and get much better results from ChatGPT or any other AI tools that you're using. So please do check it out. And thank you so much, HubSpot, for creating this resource with me and for sponsoring this portion of the video. Now, back to the video. The book also brings up a concept called the fool's choice, which is the belief that you must choose between telling the truth versus keeping a friend. Tally is just scrolling through her social media feed when she stumbles across a debate about a proposed curriculum change in her kid's school. Because she wants to be an informed parent, she goes through the entire post and all the conversations that are happening underneath as well. Tally finds herself agreeing with most things that are being said, until she gets to the post from Gloria. Gloria expresses her loathing with strong language and all caps. She says she knows without a shadow of a doubt that these curriculum changes will ruin all the neighborhood kids, all of whom will end up dropping out of school and selling drugs as a result. So other people are pushing back on Gloria, but Gloria is pushing back on the pushbacks. And Tally, as she's reading through this, she gets increasingly more triggered as well. Until at some point, she just types, at Gloria, you are the one who is an idiot. Principal Johnson has turned the school around. If she says this curriculum is the way to help our kids, then it is. You have no qualifications, and you didn't even graduate high school. Yep, so Tally here has just fallen into the fool's choice. She tries to justify it by telling herself, oh, somebody had to tell Gloria, even though it wasn't very nice. But instead, she also had another option. She could have still told the truth, but also maintained a relationship. Number 1. What do you really want? If Tally actually thinks carefully about this, she would be able to answer that what she really wants is to engage community discussion. She wants the group of parents to be able to share candidly and listen to one another. Second, what you really don't want. Thinking through this, she decides that what she doesn't want the most is to have people shut down conversation by dominating the discussion thread and throwing insults. She also doesn't want the honest difference in opinions to damage relationships. Now third, present your brain with a smarter question by combining the two into an and question. How can we have a candid conversation and strengthen relationships? Now with this new question in mind, write in the comments what Tally could have said that is able to accomplish both of these goals. Hint, maybe being keyboard warriors is not the best choice here. Okay, I just want to say that isn't it crazy that you're meant to have done all of this work prior to even opening your mouth? It's no wonder that people have so much trouble communicating. Like we usually just only think about what it is that we're going to say and ignore everything else. But actually, there is still one more thing that you're supposed to do before you even open your mouth. And that is to diffuse your own emotions, or as the book puts it, master your stories. The book presents a model called the path to action that has 4 parts. Let's illustrate this with Maria and Louis. Maria is a copywriter who is working with Louis on the latest draft of a proposal. During the meeting, they are supposed to jointly present the ideas. But when Maria pauses for a breath, Louis just takes over the presentation, making all the points that they came up with together. Finally, when the boss turns to Maria to ask if she has any input, by that time, Louis has already said anything, so Maria has nothing left to say. And it's not just this. She recently found out that prior to this presentation, Louis actually took their suggestions to the boss to discuss with him without telling her about it. Maria feels like Louis is downplaying her contributions because she's the only woman on the team. But she also doesn't want to appear oversensitive, so she usually just says nothing and keeps doing her job. Although she sometimes asserts herself by getting in a sarcastic jab about how she's being treated. Like the other day when Louis asked Maria if she can bring back some of the stuff he just printed in the printers on her way back from her lunch break, she sarcastically said, yeah, sure, why don't I just bring you your coffee and bake you a cake too while I'm at it, while rolling her eyes. So what's going on here? So the common belief that people have goes something like this. The first component is see and hear. In this case, Maria sees and hears Louis monopolizing the presentation. And she hears from her colleagues that Louis went behind her back to, go talk to the boss. Second step is feel. So she feels angry, hurt, and worried. So she acts with silence and occasional sarcasm and cheap jabs. So this is the common belief of what has happened. But there's actually an intermediary step between what she sees and hears and her feelings that is so lightning fast that she probably didn't even notice. And that step is called telling a story. This step is just after we observe what somebody else is doing and before we feel some emotions. We tell a story about why they're doing that and add a judgment whether that's good or bad. Then we have that emotional response. In this case, after Maria observed what was happening, she told herself the story that he's being sexist and doesn't value her opinion. She tells herself that he doesn't trust me. She also tells herself that she can't speak up about it, whereas other people will perceive her as being too emotional. Okay, so now we know that we tell stories, but why is this a problem? Why is it that Maria and you and I need to stop telling these stories? Well, the simple reason is that because we want different results. Clearly, the story that we've told ourselves has led to emotions and behavior that have led to results that we don't want to have. So if we want to change that, we need to tell a different story to lead to a different set of emotions and behavior. Also, another thing that oftentimes we don't like to admit is that we may also be contributing towards this reality. Usually it's not completely the fault of another person. You may also be playing a role into the situation. So what to do? Well, the best way of approaching this is by retracing your path. You know the path that led to where you are right now. So now we're going to examine it the other way around. First, you want to examine your behavior. If you find yourself moving away from dialogue, ask yourself, what am I really doing? Then, put your feelings into words. You need to learn to accurately identify the emotions behind your story. Ask, what emotions are encouraging me to act this way? Third, spot your story. Identify the story you're telling by asking yourself, what story is creating these emotions? Here are the 3 most common stories that people tell themselves. 1 is the victim story, like, woe is me, it's not my fault. 2, the villain story, it's all your fault. 3, helpless story. Such is life, alas, there's nothing I can do about it. The final step is to separate fact from story. You need to be able to distinguish between what is fact and what you invented. Ask yourself, what evidence do I have to support this story? What could possibly contradict it? Then, after you've opened up the possibility of these facts corresponding to a different version of a story, you can then tell the rest of the story. Ask yourself, what am I pretending not to notice about my role in the problem? Why would a reasonable, rational person do what they did? What should I do right now to move towards what I really want? Now going back to Maria, she retraced her path and is now entertaining what else could have happened to have led to the current situation. She answered the question, what am I pretending not to notice about my role in the problem? She realized that she also played a part in what happened. When she found out that Lewis was holding project meetings without telling her, she could have said something about it. If she did, she probably would have been able to have an open dialogue. Instead, she decided to stay silent and just let her resentment grow. And during the presentation, she could have interrupted him. Instead, she just sulked and stayed completely silent when Lewis was answering all of the questions. Now, why would a reasonable, rational, and decent person do what Lewis did? This one is interesting. Because after thinking through it, she realizes that maybe he really cares about producing good quality work. And maybe he doesn't realize what he's doing. His actions during a meeting may have just been out of nervousness as opposed to a judgment towards her. What does she really want? She wants to have a respectful relationship with Lewis and be treated with respect and acknowledged for her work. And what should she do right now in order to work towards that? She decided to make an appointment to speak to Lewis about how the presentation went and how they worked together. And guess what? After she did, Lewis apologized. He explained that he thought that he should give the boss a heads up because they might be presenting some controversial things, and in retrospect, he shouldn't have done that without her. He says that he tends to get really nervous during presentations, so even though they split the slides, he suddenly forgot which slides were his and just covered all of them. At the end of the conversation, Lewis even said, hey, maybe next time when we're doing a presentation together, why don't I just take the first half and you take the latter half, or vice versa? That would help him a lot. By mastering your stories, you're able to diffuse your emotions and be in an actual open mind space to be able to have a productive, calm conversation. All right. Okay, so with all of this prep work in place, we're finally actually ready to have the crucial conversation. At the beginning of this chapter, the book makes a crazy claim. They say that when it's safe, you can say anything. It's not about what it is that you're saying, but how it's being perceived. But if you kind of think about it, it does make sense. I'm sure there's been times in which you've gotten pretty painful, intense feedback, and although you feel hurt and uncomfortable, you were able to accept that feedback and feel grateful towards that person. While on the other hand, there's probably been cases in which they say something and it's not really that big of a deal, but for some reason you get really agitated and emotionally charged. The book explains that the reason for this is that people rarely get defensive just based upon the content of what's being said. They only become defensive when they no longer feel safe or questioning or they're suspecting ill intent. They feel respected by the other person and that they feel like the other person is saying these things out of the kindness of wanting to see them become better. They can actually take the feedback well. This is why the best communicators are always looking for signs when there's deteriorating safety and trying to build up safety. Let's do a little quiz. I'm going to display some questions on screen and I want you to write down numbers from 1 to 12 and next to it answer true or false. Pause the video now. Okay, cool. Now match it to this chart. For example, if you answered true to 1, 2, 4, 6, and 10, then this is what it should look like. This is your own silence under stress score. For each of these components, which I'll explain in a little bit, if you have 1 or 2 check marks, it means that this is one of your stress responses. Now tally up the 2 columns to get your total sum for silence or violence. You can have a bias towards silence, a bias towards violence, or you can have both. Could have a bias towards both. If it makes you feel any better, the first time that I took this quiz, this is what I got. Yeah, I literally do every single one of these not productive stress response behaviors. The reason why this quiz is important is because the first person that you need to understand well in this situation is yourself. So when we're having these conversations, before we even think about getting other people to feel safe or having that conversation with other people, we first need to control our own emotions. So you need to be very aware of your tendencies when somebody triggers you, like how it is that you respond. Under the silence category, we have masking, avoiding, and withdrawing. Silence is basically anything that withholds information. And this is really bad because if you are not having information in that dialogue, then there's no way you can solve this problem. Masking is when you subtly understate things and you're masking your true emotions, usually by using something like sarcasm or sugarcoating things. Avoiding is trying to steer the conversation away from a sensitive topic. Like if someone asks you if you think that their suit looks good, you might just say something like, oh, I do like blue as a color, as opposed to saying that I don't like your suit. Withdrawing just means literally leaving the conversation, making up an excuse like, oh, I have to go for a call, and then just leaving. By the way, this is something that is becoming an increasingly bigger problem in our digital age, and it is now colloquially known as just ghosting, leaving someone unread and just disappearing forever. We'll talk more about how these techniques translate to digital communication later in the video. The other type of way that people express their lack of safety is through violence. This is any type of verbal strategy that attempts to convince or control someone to force them into a different viewpoint. Controlling is when you try to get people to think the way that you do. Like for example, saying that, oh, everybody thinks this way. Labeling is putting a label on a certain person or a group of people and they're rejecting all of them. Like saying, oh, only insert political party name would think that's a good idea. Attacking is just attacking. Being threatening, like if you do this, just watch what will happen. Write in the comments below if your style is more toward silence, violence, or both. Okay, so now that you know how people respond to a lack of safety, especially yourself, next we need to work on how it is that we can build safety for yourself and other people. But first I want to talk about how this shows up in the virtual world. A lot of conversations are virtual these days, and that is both good news and bad news. The good news is that these techniques work the same way in the virtual world. It's still people trying to communicate. But the bad news is that the amount of information you're getting in a conversation is now severely limited, which also means that it makes the conversation harder to have. When you're sitting face to face someone, you're able to read that person through not just verbally. You're able to see their emotions, you're able to see their reactions, you're able to perceive lots of little things about them. But when we switch to video chat, then to telephone, or then to text messages and emails, you're losing an increasing amount of that information. So luckily, there's still some good news in the sense that it doesn't mean that your conversations are just doomed and you just have to guess at what each other are thinking. It just means that you need to do a little bit more work. When you feel like somebody's safety is being threatened, what you need to do is try to increase the amount of information you can get from them. Face-to-face conversation is always going to be the best, but if you can't manage that, try to just increase that flow. Like if you're just like texting someone and they're ghosting you, try to suggest having a phone call or maybe like a Zoom video call. With greater information available to you, it'll be easier for you to have that conversation. I'm going to put on screen now some examples of what you can say to someone to try to escalate them into a different form of communication that allows for more information flow. Okay, so as we said earlier, safety is extremely important. So your primary goal in having that conversation is to make that person feel safe. And this is fulfilled by two conditions. First one is mutual purpose as well as mutual respect. Let's take a look at a married couple called Oba and Mari. Oba is a chef and Mari is a product manager. Last year has been really hard and the recession has triggered Mari's company to ask her to take on more responsibilities while downsizing her team. And for Oba, the restaurant he was working for completely shut down and he got fired. There's now a lot of financial strain and Mari is also working longer hours. Oba feels like Mari is just so consumed with work that she doesn't really acknowledge him anymore and she always puts him after work. While Mari feels really burnt out from work and feels like Oba is not picking up any of the responsibilities at home. Their relationship has really deteriorated. Essentially every day Mari would just come home exhausted and then she would look at Oba who's just sitting on the couch over there and notice the fact that there's still laundry that hasn't been folded and there's dirty dishes in the sink. Mari feels really angry and she just walks to their room, shuts the door and goes to sleep, while Oba just eventually watches TV and sleeps on the couch. Oba wants to bring up this issue with Mari, but he's quite afraid because when he's tried to do that in the past, she's always just snapped at him and it hasn't gone anywhere. And that's because Oba was not able to establish mutual purpose. The way that Oba has brought this up with Mari is somewhere along the lines of, hey Mari, I was wondering if we could talk about what happened on Friday night. You know, when you came home late from work and then just went straight into our room. You see, Oba has good intent, but the way that he was phrasing this makes Mari feel as if He is just accusing her. They don't have mutual purpose here. It feels like his purpose is just to accuse her. And that's not something that Mari wants to do, so she just snaps back at him. Instead, what he needs to do from the very beginning is to establish that mutual purpose and respect. For example, he could say something like, "Hey Mari, I'd like to talk about how much you're working and how it's impacting our relationship. I'm not bringing this up to criticize you or suggest the problem is yours. I know you're under tremendous pressure at work right now, and I'm so grateful for the sacrifices you're making for our family. This is showing that he appreciates her work." He continues, "I really just want to talk about what we can do to make things better for both of us in this new reality we're in." Now this is mutual purpose. He's clearly saying that what he's trying to do is for both of them to work together to have a better relationship with each other. And Mari is likely to be a lot more receptive to this. But let's just say, for example, that Mari is just still in a pissy mood and just really tired and still snaps back at Oba. The book suggests two strategies. The first one is to apologize. He could say that, "I'm sorry that I made you feel that I was criticizing you." Then he can use the second technique called contrasting. He says, "I'm not blaming you for how I feel or act. That's my problem. I don't see this as your problem. I see it as our problem. Both of us may be acting in ways that make things worse. I know I am, at least." The contrast that he's using here is by explicitly clarifying what is his problem versus our problem. This allows Mari to soften up and for Oba to now start building safety back into the conversation. Mari says, "I'm probably at fault as well. Sometimes I just pout because I feel so overwhelmed and burnt out. I'm sorry too." She then continues, "I just don't see how we can work this out. My job is what it is right now. With you out of work, I'm not really in a position to cut back or try to renegotiate. And when I come home and I see that the housework is not done, it's really frustrating. I know that you want us to spend time together, but I'm just exhausted and need time on my own to recharge." Now, at least Mari is talking about how it is that she's actually feeling, and this allows Oba to re-establish a sense of mutual purpose. He continues to say, "I know you're stretched thin and I don't want something that doesn't work for you. I want to find a way to have us both feel close, appreciated, and loved." And he succeeds in doing this. Mari says, "That's what I want too." Of course, this conversation is going to keep going back and forth for a while, but as long as Oba prioritizes making Mari feel safe, by explicitly showing and reminding her of mutual purpose and mutual respect, the conversation will flow. Alright, great. We're finally at a point in which we're having a conversation now. But what is the best way to say what you want to say? The book gives us another acronym called STATE. It stands for share your facts, tell your story, ask for others' paths, talk tentatively, and encourage testing. Let's consider a scenario between Anita and her 16-year-old daughter Amber. Anita just went grocery shopping, and when she's at the stand to pay for her groceries, she reaches into her wallet to grab the $20 bill that she knows is there and finds out that it's not there. She immediately turns over to her daughter and wants to yell, "Amber, where is it?" Now, if she did this, she would have fallen into what we talked about earlier called the fool's choice, in which things probably will not end very well. Instead, what she should do is state. She first shares her facts and says, "Amber, when I want to pay for the groceries just now, I was planning to use the $20 that I thought I had in my wallet. But when I opened my wallet, the money wasn't there. I thought it was strange because I saw it there yesterday. Then I remembered you asking for some money last night to go out with your friends. I told you no, and you ended up going to a movie and dinner with them anyway." Amber says, "Uh-huh." Then Anita will tentatively tell her story. This means to share what she thinks could have happened, but don't say it in a way that is directly like "this happened." Instead, she says, "Obviously, one possibility is that you took the money." Very tentative. Amber then quickly responds, "You think I stole your money?" Now Anita moves to the third step, ask for others' plans. Instead of just quickly snapping back, "Yes, I think you stole the money," she needs to invite input from Amber's perspective. "Honestly, I don't know what to think. All I know is what I just shared. And I hope you can see how I might at least have the question." Now Anita continues to talk tentatively. "Amber, honey, I know you're a good kid and I don't want to jump to hurtful conclusions. I also know that people make mistakes. I did when I was your age. I just want to be able to talk about things, even hard things, honestly and openly, even when one of us has messed up." Now Amber is still a little bit hesitant, and since Anita is in a position of authority, she then proceeds on to the fifth step, which is to encourage testing. Encourage testing, which she's actually already done, is trying to get the other person to give more input into it. And you kind of have to do that in a way that coaxes coaxes the other person to provide that information. In this case, Anita continues to encourage Amber by telling her that, hey, whatever it is that is going to be happening, it's going to be okay. We can solve and get through this. Until finally, Amber opens up. She says, I was planning to put it back. I wasn't trying to steal it. I didn't think you'll notice before I got my paycheck today. And there you have it. Now, sometimes if you're facing someone who has a very strong tendency towards silence when they're feeling unsafe, or just they're like a relatively, person who doesn't like to express their opinions very much, they may need more coaxing in order to get them to start contributing towards the conversation. So in this case, the book provides us with 2 additional acronyms. The first one is called AMP, and these are 4 powerful listening skills to help the person open up to you. A stands for ask. Start by simply expressing your interest in learning that person's viewpoints. Say something like, I would love to know your viewpoint. M is mirror. You can increase safety and make people feel more respected by mirroring what it is that they said. So if they say something like, I feel hurt because of this reason, you can say something like, I can see you feel hurt. P stands for paraphrase. As that person starts sharing part of their story, you can paraphrase what it is that they're saying and say it back to them. They might say, when you correct me about something I say in public, it makes me feel like I'm lesser than. You should paraphrase this back to them and say, I can understand that when I say certain things in public, it can make you feel really hurt and lesser than. And finally, the kind of last resort is called prime. Priming is when if they just refuse to talk to you, whatever it is that you're saying, and they're just and just don't actually tell you whatever it is that they're feeling, you can start trying to guess what it is that they may be feeling. You could say something like, perhaps you were feeling hurt during that situation. This is usually helpful because people you're basically putting it out for them, so it's easier for them to either acknowledge it, or if you're wrong, they also have an impulse to correct you. Now, as they start softening up and actually telling you these things, then you should do your ABCs. A is for agree. Agree with them when you share the same viewpoints. Build is when if they leave something out, start building up what it is that you have in common. Sort of expand on what they said. You can say something like, oh, I can see why that's very hurtful for you. And the other day when I said the same thing again, it really built up the hurt. And finally, C is for compare. When you do differ significantly with someone, which ultimately that's usually very common that people don't agree with each other entirely, instead of just saying that they're wrong, what you should do is actually try to place the opinions side by side with each other. You can say something like, I see things differently. Let me share my viewpoint. Or I come from this at a different perspective. I'm interested to hear your thoughts. Then you can use the state acronym, which we just talked about earlier, to express your thoughts. Remember that the whole purpose is to encourage conversation from both sides. Calm, collected sharing of viewpoints and information for you to finally come up with a solution. By using the STATE acronym, you're able to say what it is that you want to say while still being respectful and not having to sugarcoat anything or just try to weaken what it is that you're trying to say. And by using AMP and the ABCs, you're encouraging other people to contribute into that conversation. Of course, all at the same time, you need to be maintaining safety throughout that conversation. So much, isn't it? But I promise you, if you actually practice this, and I really, really did practice this, your conversations get a lot better. It's worth it. Final acronym, I promise. So say you're having this conversation, right? And things are going well, but then suddenly the other person just says something super, super triggering to you. And you just really feel very, very triggered about this. What to do in this situation? Well, there's the acronym called CURE. C stands for collect yourself. Take a deep breath and collect your emotions. Don't say anything impulsive. Remind yourself that you are safe. Remind yourself of the purpose of this conversation. Remind yourself of what's important. You can even repeat an affirmation to yourself, this cannot hurt me, in your head. U stands for understand. Try to be curious. Ask questions. If they're saying something hurtful, ask them questions about why it is that they think these things. Can they expand more about these things? If you focus your attention on understanding a situation, that helps you and distracts you from internalizing what they're saying. R stands for recover. Sometimes you're just way too triggered. You're just fuck this, fuck you. Well, instead of doing that, just ask for a timeout. Give yourself some time to recover from the conversation. Say, hey, I feel like my emotions are rising right now and I don't feel like I'm able to have a calm conversation. Could we regroup in 10 minutes? Something like that. And finally, E stands for engage. If you've done a good job of calming yourself down, reestablishing what's important, then you should be ready to engage with what they actually said. Try to objectively sift through what it is that they said and see if there's a kernel of truth to what they're saying, or maybe it's like completely misguided, and that's okay as well. But try to objectively go through what they're saying and engage with the content. Okay, so at this point, you're able to have a really good conversation with someone and, settle your differences, figure things out that you've been putting off for a long time. You feel really good about yourself. You feel really proud for everybody. But wait, can't forget the final step. You see, it's great that you had a really great conversation and you're all feeling happy about it, but there's no point of having a conversation if nothing comes out of it. That is why the final step is to actually have action items, clear deliverables, a plan to follow up and keep each other accountable. It sounds so silly that this needs to be mentioned, but after getting through all of that, you usually just feel such a huge sense of relief that you're just like, oh good, like this conversation is over now, that you don't actually make an action plan and follow through with everything that you talked about. Super easy to forget. So make sure that first have action items, determine who is doing what and when, make the deliverables very clear. Whatever it is that you agreed on, make it very clear as to what it is that will be done by each person. Set an actual time for when it is that you're going to check up. It's really helpful to have it just as like a calendar, just send like a calendar invite or just like a slot on the calendar as a reminder. Also make sure that you're actually writing down or recording the commitments somewhere. So in case anybody forgets about what the conversation was about and what came out of it. This is also going to allow everybody to keep each other accountable for what was agreed upon. All right, we have reached the end of this summary. Now, here is a little assessment of all the things that we talked about previously. If you can actually answer these questions, it means that you've actually learned and was able to process everything that we talked about in this video. If you're feeling overwhelmed right now, I just want to tell you that I totally get it. It's like something that, at least for me, it was like extremely unnatural, and I had to like keep practicing to get better. And I'm not saying I'm a great communicator now, but I'm definitely a lot better than I was, when I first did the stress quiz. In fact, when I was going through this book again to make this video, I did the quiz again, and here are my results. So yay me, I am able to be better at communicating now. It's something that I'm gonna keep working on because I understand the value of having these crucial conversations and the value of having good relationships. All right, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you guys in the next video or live stream.